I actually struggled with words as a child. I was always in the slow learner group. Dyslexia before they had a word for it. Instead of that, they used to put us into groups with an R in front of our class. So I was in R1, R2, R3. And at some point you ask what R stands for and you're told it's remedial. So it's barely encouraging. But in spite of my reading difficulties and learning difficulties, I was just fascinated by the spoken word. So what I couldn't do through conventional reading, I did through learning and memorizing.
We've got so much to get through with regards to the stories, the memories that we've just seen there, and that wonderful little video as well. Let's start from the beginning of the Dubai chapter. It says, to be continued at the moment. It's 1978. Take me back to the day that you arrived here, what you arrived to, but also, why Dubai?
I was one of these English school children that was fascinated by Arabia. I had my great uncles, of whom there were several. They all fought in various areas in Arabia, the Middle East, during the Second World War. And they came back with their tales. They also came back with, they brought back a language which slipped into lingua franca in England, where they would talk about bints as ladies and having a shufti to look at something, and everything was quayas if it was good, and all this sort of thing. They all came back, all kind of indoctrinated with this Arab world. My great uncle Tom gave me a copy, a really sensational original copy of 7 Pillars of Wisdom when I was 15. But even before I received that, if it came to choosing war comics, which we all had, these little graphic war novels, I would always go to the ones which were about the Foreign Legion and Beauchest and fighting in the desert and all that sort of thing. So I was just one of these sort of old-fashioned English schoolboys who was fascinated by the desert. I also hated the cold. I had newspaper rounds and milk rounds, and I swore that I would come and live in Arabia. So that was really the root of my interest in Arabia. And when I went to hotel school, it was something that I used to talk about. Okay. It wasn't an interest that I concealed. And then when I was working as an assistant manager in a 5-star hotel in England, I got a call one day from one of my cohort from the hotel school, and he said, "Ian, have you seen in the Telegraph this morning, they're advertising for an assistant manager in a new hotel in Dubai?" I mean, very, very short version of the story. You know, I got it, I applied, they flew me out here, I got the job, and at the age of 21, miraculously, in January 78, I was assistant manager of a brand new 5-star hotel in Dubai. And the interesting financial footnote to that was that I'd been earning £37 a week after tax. And when I arrived here, I was earning £250 a week with no tax and a car and a flat.
Why did you stay? Why on earth did you stay, eh?
It was downhill from there on in.
Obviously, you came over here to work in hotels. So why the move to media, and why the setting up of Motivate?
Look, I loved the hotel. I was there for almost 18 months. It was incredible. But I couldn't believe that I had landed in 1978 in a country that had no media. There was no television, there was no radio, at least there was no English radio. There was no television at all. There was no English newspaper. There may have been a little bit of Arabic media that I wasn't aware of, but there was no English magazines, no English newspapers in 1978. If I wanted to advertise the restaurants or the nightclub in the hotel that I was running, I would have to get leaflets printed, and there was a company in Sharjah who used to staple together the previous day's sheets from Reuters daily news bulletin, the previous days, and they would tear them off in roughly the same length and run them through these Rono machines, you know, wax drums, and then if you took over a couple of thousand leaflets that you'd printed and cash, they would staple them along with these pages. And then there were boys selling them at the traffic lights or at road junctions for £1 a copy. I mean, that was literally the only news, and it was called the Recorder Daily News Bulletin. So it wasn't rocket science that I had an interest in writing. I had been turned down. I'd written short stories, Private Eye, all sorts of magazines, you name it. And all I had was rejection slips. So my writing wasn't exactly being much appreciated. And I had this innate interest in writing, so I decided to give up my job and I decided to start the country's first magazine.
And that was the first edition, was it?
This was the first magazine, and it wasn't that bad. I mean, it was 28 pages. We had a colour cover. There's a copy for everybody here when you leave, an authentic original copy of the 1979 magazine. There's a space here where it said editor in Fairservice, and one of the last things I did before it went to press was to have that removed on the basis that if there wasn't ever a second issue, I wouldn't be embarrassed by the first one.
There have been a few issues since the first edition. I mean, setting up, the launch of the magazine, obviously it's setting up the business as well. We all know about setting up businesses now, fairly straightforward, etc. Was it straightforward back then?
There was nothing straightforward about it, but my blessed mother always said to me, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And if I had any knowledge at all about media or publishing or the industry, I would probably, still be working in a hotel. So no, it was a struggle. I found a couple of staff, and the only knowledgeable member of staff was a lady called Wendy Johnson, and her claim to fame was that she had once been the secretary of the UK Press Gazette. So at least she knew terminology like sub, and proofreader, and stuff like that. But Wendy joined me as deputy editor. We got a couple of people on board to help with the sales, so there were 4 of us, and we literally made it up as we went along. We wrote everything ourselves. It was hot metal and then cold metal. By that I mean that all of the typesetting was done still with lead in trays. You know, there was no obviously there was no digital printing in the 70s, but it was literally all done by hand. And then we had to stick the galleys on and as we laid the pages out, and then we had to transfer all the finished pages to the printing press, and the heat would melt the glue and the wax which held it in place. And when we got to the printing press, we'd then have to straighten everything up again before they could. Yes, it was quite challenging.
When did you partner up with Abaid?
In 1981, we'd had a fun first couple of years. I mean, financially, it was not rewarding. In fact, for the first, after I launched this issue, no, before this issue, but you'll see at the back when you pick up your copy that there's the Dune Beat Trail with me me as a DJ, but we painted in a beard and moustache just to try and disguise me. But we actually brought out a mobile disco from England, and for the first 2 years we made more money with the What's On Tune Beat Disco than we did from actually publishing the magazine. But to answer your question, I tied up with Abaid in 1981 as a result of a call from the Ministry of Information. I got a call saying, would you come and meet the Undersecretary, Mr. Habib Areda? My goodness, this was... So I went to the ministry and I was just terrified. And I walked into his office and he had, like a dozen copies of What's On the table. And I stood there and he said, sit down, sit down. So I sat down and he said, this is you, is it? I went, yes, sir. I said, have I done something wrong? I said, do you want me to stop? He said, no. He said, we don't want you to stop. He said, we like it. He starts looking through some of the copies. He said, some of this is factually incorrect. What you call history is actually politics. I'll explain the difference. at another time. He said, and I said, well, what do I have to do? And he said, well, we've been watching you and we like what you're doing, but we think it's high time, I don't know, that you maybe got a publishing license, a local partner. And I said, oh, is that necessary? And he said, yes. So he said, we're going to give you 6 months to find a local partner and get a license. And if you can do it within that 6 months, all well and good. Otherwise, come back and see us, and we'll see if we can help you. That was how amazingly cooperative they were. Yeah.
Listen, we've got so much. The 1980s. I mean, I take it was time for growth, not just for Motivate, but also for the country. And I mean, you look at some of the early editions of What's On. It's amazing. Some of the names, and of course that we saw in the video there. Some of the people that were coming to the UA in the 1980s. Is that when things started to gain momentum?
Yeah, for sure. People started taking a lot of attention of the Emirates. It was obviously a very, very young country. Yeah. By the same token, at exactly the same time, we were also confronted with the conflict in Iran and Iraq. So, on that hand, that wasn't quite so. That wasn't quite so positive. I think that's when I met Ron. Did you come over as a war correspondent then, Ron? So yeah, we had our challenges, but the people were really taking notice. 82, the year after I went into partnership with Obeid Al Tire, was a year of great growth for us. We started getting into some great ancillary promotions. It was the year of the 1982 World Cup, yeah. And I don't know how we got onto this, but somehow we bought the rights to the official FIFA World Cup programme for the Arab world. I mean, what on earth we wanted that for? And the idea was that we would sell lots of advertising and then sell the programmes in advance of the World Cup. And by pure coincidence, I don't know, I was talking to somebody called Terry Scott in a pub one day, and he said he knew someone who knew someone who knew Bobby Moore. And I said, well, is there any chance that we could get Bobby out to help? Maybe he could write a column in the magazine. So cut another long story short. A couple of months later, Bobby turned up with the 1966 World Cup squad. We didn't have the Charlton brothers. They couldn't come. Gordon Banks had a car accident, so he'd lost an eye. So we had Alex Stepney in goal, and we had Mike Summerby replacing one of the Charlton brothers. I can't remember who the other one was replaced by. But we had Bobby Moore, Martin Peters, Jeff Hurst, Colin Bell, Ian Callahan, George Cohen. We had the 66 squad flown out here, courtesy of British Airways, road transport and whatever, courtesy of MMI, hotel courtesy of the Metropolitan Hotel. And all of a sudden, you know, we were putting on this unbelievable event and promoting this programme all over the UAE, and we played football every day for 10 days. With the World Cup team, and no one could score a goal against them. We played against the national team, and we played against each head Emirati team, and we played against the champion expat league players, and no one could score a goal against them. And they were all in their 40s. They were twice the age of the people they were playing.
80s period of growth, not just for the country, also for Motivate as well. Adding titles along the way. Emirates Woman, I think 83. Then Open Skies coming up after that.
Yeah, the next two titles were Emirates Woman, that we purchased from Hawk Publishing in Ajman, who were publishing the Yellow Pages, and we did a deal with them to buy it off them. They were publishing it quarterly. It was the brainchild of a lovely lady called Joan van der Merwe, who worked at the College Times, and we took it over from them on a revenue share for 3 years. And then we got the ownership outright, and we immediately made that monthly. The next really big step after that, and we were doing lots of sports programs. I mean, the DWSA sports program sponsoring the ski championships. We were, whatever happened, the rally, Dubai International Rally, we would sponsor it, we'd do a program. So we were doing all sorts of sports programs. But the big break came when Maurice Flanagan phoned me in early '85 and said, Ian, you know, His Highness has asked me to launch an airline before the end of the year. We're going to need an in-flight magazine. And he said, do you think, we don't have a budget, but you can have the advertising revenue. At least to cover your costs, and then we can look at what happens if it ever goes into profit. And I remember saying to Maurice over the phone that if you can launch an airline in 6 months, I'm pretty sure I can launch a magazine in 6 months. So come the launch of the airline in '85, we had our magazines on board, and our magazines remained on board. The last print run, 150,000 copies. First print run, 10,000 copies. It hasn't relaunched since COVID. The restrictions in COVID meant no printed magazines on board. So apart from the duty-free guide, which we do, what we do now for Emirates is we have 8 channels for which we provide all the content. But we still hope that Open Skies will come back. But that was a massive break because the revenue on Open Skies in 82, 83, 84 and going onwards equaled the revenue of everything else we did in the company.
Obviously the magazines and all the spin-offs as well that we've seen that the Motivate become now. The magazines were what was your sort of day-to-day business. What about books? When did that sort of come onto the radar? We know that you are a lover of books, but from a Motivate point of view?
We were approached by Dubai Municipality in 1986. Dubai was hosting the World Chess Olympiad. Yeah. And once again, as always, and it hasn't changed to today, when people come to you, they always say, we don't have a budget. But we want a souvenir book to give away to all the visitors and everyone who comes to the Chess Olympiad. So we came up with the concept of the commercial book of Dubai. I wrote a lot of it, I edited it. We had some freelancers writing specialist chapters, whether it be on industry or oil and gas and what have you. And then we put it together and everything was driven by advertising. We went out, we sold advertising to everyone. We got a letter of support from the municipality. And we produced what was basically our first book. Yeah. It was very substantial. And it carried a huge amount of advertising. And it was given away free with the Chess Olympiad. Now the strange thing was that after that, people kept coming to us for this book. And there was nothing in it for us to reprint it. We couldn't very well go back to the advertisers and say, pay again. So we came up with this here, which was our first book. And we called it Dubai Gateway to the Gulf. And basically the first edition, which came out a few months after the Chess Olympiad, contained all of the editorial, some of it slightly updated, some of it upgraded, some new pictures. None of the advertising. Yeah. And we put it out as a book, a 50 dirham book. We created what we called the Arabian Heritage Series, and that was our first proper book.
That was the first one onto the shelves, but and many have followed. Many have been featured down here at the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature, of course. Biggest breakthrough for you, though, when it comes to the books division?
We were literally publishing around 8 or 10 of these books a year in the Arabian Heritage Series. One author, Shirley Kay, who was the wife of the Consul General, she herself, I think, did 6, Emirates Archaeological Heritage, Land of the Emirates, and then she did one on flora and fauna, Russell Kamer. I mean, she was prolific. Peter Hellier and I jointly did one on Abu Dhabi, and then we did one together on Al Ain. So they were the sort of backbone of our publishing. And we did a few special hardback editions of other books, but that was the main thing. Until, I guess, Wilfrid Thesiger.
What was that, late 80s?
Yeah, late 80s. We had done some coffee table books before that, which had been very, very well received. We'd also done a series of guidebooks, smaller format guidebooks. We did off-road books with maps and diagrams, how to find this, you know, wadi bashing, etc., etc. But I think when I met Wilfred Thester in the late 80s, he came over to do a photographic exhibition sponsored by Barclays Bank. And they had an exhibition of his work in Abu Dhabi and in Abu Dhabi and in Dubai at the British Council. And I met him, and this was another one of the books, Arabian Sands, which was responsible for my interest in Arabia. So meeting him was like meeting a personal hero of mine. And I said to him, why has the book never been published in Arabic? And he said, well, it's banned in most countries in English, let alone in Arabic. He said they wouldn't have it in Arabic. And I said, well, if I can get it published in Arabic, can I get the rights? And he said, look, we can't even get the books in this country. He said, if there are some that get in, but very few. So he arranged for me to meet Mike Curtis at Curtis Brown in London, beautiful offices. Set up this meeting, and I was having a lunch meeting. And bear in mind, it was 88 or whatever. So I mean, I was 56, I was like 32 or 33, and not exactly, you know, the world's most experienced publisher. But I arrived there and I walked into the meeting room, huge round table, and I looked around and I thought I'd walked onto a television set, because David Shepherd, the Elephant Man, was, you know, the guy who did all the elephant paintings, and he was one of their clients, and he was at this luncheon. Wilfred Thester was sitting there next to Dimbleby, and then there was Jocelyn Dimbleby, who did cookery books with them, but mainly they were all very, very famous authors in the wildlife and pictorial genre. And then Mike starts introducing me to all these people, and I literally had to pinch myself because I couldn't believe I was there. And I started working with Curtis Brown. I picked up the world rights to Arabian Sands in hardback, the world rights to the Marsh Arabs. I found that most of his books have gone out of print. Desert Marsh and Mountain, Visions of a Nomad, the worldwide Arabic rights to Arabian Sands. I signed up basically all of his back catalogue, which had been allowed to go out of print, and where the rights had reverted to him. And then I started working, producing one or even two coffee table books a year by Wilfred. The very first one we did, Visions of a Nomad. When we republished that, Michael Palin, who was a big fan, nominated it for the Daily Telegraph Book of the Year, which it became the Telegraph Book of the Year. And then that was massive, because then Ronald Codray got in touch with me. He had the most amazing archives. He'd been here for 30 or 40 years. We'd already started working with Nur Ali Rashid and Ramesh Shukla. We did a dozen books each of their pictorial histories. And the book publishing just became phenomenal, really.
I mean, the company itself has faced a number of challenges in line with what the country itself has also faced. I mean, not more so than the financial crisis of 2010. We can talk about that a little later on. But also, I mean, you've seen the company through 2 Gulf Wars as well. And whilst that affected the region, did it affect business at all?
The strange thing was, you know, they say every cloud has a silver lining, particularly with the books. With the amount of naval ships coming in, we actually had phenomenal sales. Yeah. 2 individual airmen, soldiers, sailors who were here, or because we were selling books to the libraries on board the ships. But we actually did pretty well during that period. They were difficult, but I don't remember that they were as challenging, perhaps. I mean, they certainly weren't as challenging as the global financial crisis. They certainly weren't as challenging as COVID. So, I mean, wars, to a certain extent, as a publisher, you know, they give one opportunities. I mean, we published both of the memoirs of General Sir Peter de la Billière, Storm Command, I don't know whether that's around, But Storm Command was he was the second in command of the Allied forces, number one in the British forces. Schwarzkopf was his boss, as it were. But Peter was a great character, and he wanted to get his Storm Command book out as soon as he could. So I worked very, very closely with him doing that book. Became extremely close friends with him. As you do, by the way, with most authors, you tend to build up this affinity and relationship with them as you work closely with them. And we took Storm Command all over the Middle East. We only had the Middle East rights. When it came to 18 months later, when he wanted to launch his actual memoirs, which were called Looking for Trouble, he was the most awarded officer or soldier in the British Army of the century. He had fought in every war in which Britain had been involved. He had been the head of the SAS. He led the SAS into Prince's Gate, the Iranian hostage seize. He was Margaret Thatcher's right hand on that operation. So he had a great story to tell, and he then came back with this wonderful book called Looking for Trouble, which traced all of the wars. And again, I went off to his wonderful farm in Northumbria and spent a few days there going through his pictures and helping him to write it. And a quick anecdote, shut me up if I start running off too long on any stories. But a lovely anecdote with Peter was that we as with Wilfred, whenever we went around to do these Gulf tours, these press launches, people of Thesiger and de la Billier's seniority are accorded VIP status when they land. There's a red carpet, sometimes there's a small band, the ambassador, a few local ministers are there, and you get whisked off to the embassy, and then you have lunch and a press conference, stay at the embassy and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, he had been saying to me every day, whenever we landed, we were always in seat 1A and 1B, and we were always off plane before anyone else. But he always used to say to me, Ian, it's wonderful how you look after me, but when Schwarzkopf and I had our own planes, I mean, it's just not the same. and I know that in the end it was a bit of a tease, but I mean, he must have said this every day for a week. So when he came back for the launch of the second book, Looking for Trouble, I met him at the airport. He said, you shouldn't have gone for trouble. And I said, no problem, Wilfred. I'll see you to the hotel. And I said, tomorrow we'll take you and we'll show you your plane. My plane? I said, well, yeah. I said, I know you were very disappointed with the arrangements on the last book launch, so I've chartered a plane for the week for the two of us to travel around privately. Oh my God. Yeah, boy, you can't be serious. I was only joking. And I led him along for as long as I could. But we had indeed got a plane, and John Noel, one of my other authors who did the Above Dubai and Above Oman series, he had been the private pilot of Sultan Qaboos, and then he went on to become chief pilot for Sheikh Michel Al Sabah, who owned Bombardier in Kuwait. And when he told Sheikh Michel that Peter was coming, he was so indebted to him because of Kuwait being liberated and all the rest of it, that he offered one of his planes and John Noel for a week. So this was great because I was able to tease Peter that I'd actually chartered it, but I had to tell him the truth in the end. But we set off on this 7-day journey around the Gulf, and Peter would sit in the back and fall asleep. And I would sit next to John, and John was a very good mate. He said, we can't waste this week. He said, why don't we teach you to fly this bloody thing? And I said, well, yeah, I'm up for it. So, Peter would nod off, and then he would give me flying lessons every day, and by the second or third day, I was doing takeoffs. Well, that was all very good. And then the fourth day, he decided I should do a landing. This was at Qatar. And I said, no, I'm not ready for a landing. He said, look, he said, you're ready for a landing. You should be doing a landing. It's your fourth day flying. You should be doing a landing. It's not a jumbo jet. It's not rocket science. It is rocket science. So there we go, and we're flying into land. You can see the reception, and there they actually did have a jeep and a red carpet, and a bit like a scene from, you know, Carry On Up the wherever, Khyber. So he's giving me these instructions, and I land just short of the reception committee, and the plane bounces horrendously. Passes it, bounces a second time, bounces a third time, and I finally managed to bring it to a stop. Peter is, you know, apoplectic, and they're trying to get, or they're driving up, the band are running, chasing the plane. So it really was like a Carry On movie. And we finally got out. We went back to the embassy. We had the lunch. We had the press conference. And the first question, because he was such a famous fighter, was always, "So Peter, what was the most frightening thing that you ever encountered?" And he always had the same thing. He'd been in Malaysia, and he's surrounded by these people, and you know, he had to fight 12 people off with his hands and one knife and all this sort of stuff. And he said, "Well, he said, I would have told you this story that I normally tell. Until today," he said, "everything has changed." He said, "Now the most frightening thing I've ever been through is waking up and seeing that my plane is being crash-landed by my publisher."
Flying licenses. Who needs them, eh? Flying licenses. Listen, there are so many names to talk about. The Hendersons, Lord Patrick Litchfield, Marco Pierre White. But I am conscious of time. I'm also conscious about talking about one of your most famous authors, of course, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, both as an author and a poet. But before we do that, let's just talk poetry. When did your love of poetry start?
I was very keen on poetry as a child, as I said, even though I had writing difficulties. I mean, I've still got some poems that I had tried to write as a kid. I really was interested in the written word, and but I mean, I haven't spent a lifetime writing poetry. It's been rather patchy, but there's always been an interest there. I think in my 40s I started writing quite regularly again. Certainly by the time I was publishing Sheikh Mohammed's poetry, I'd been writing quite a lot myself, and I needed to have done, because the first book of poems that we published for him, we only had 3 weeks to publish, and they weren't in a very good state, to be honest. They were literally given to us word for word, translated from Arabic to English. So Janice and I had to sit up for 3 nights trying to put these words, to reorder the words into poems. They were beautiful thoughts, but they needed to be very seriously reordered. And we managed to do that, and we managed to get them all cleared by His Highness's office. And the book was produced in under 3 weeks, because he wanted them at the opening of a global poetry event that he was hosting here.
I want to talk more about His Highness's poems, His Highness's books as well, but I also want to hear more about the Cliché Laureate as well. And I'm sure all of us here would be honoured if you'd read us a few poems as well. Would you be happy with that?
It said that on the can, so I suppose I'd better, unless I want to be sued. Do you mind if I stand up?
No, we've been an absolute honour.
Yeah. Look, as Tom mentioned, my personal moniker is Cliché Laureate, and on the various volumes of these that lay around the house, it's always got Cliché Laureate on the front. And you can imagine why. You know, because the hallmark of a lot of my poems is that they sound like Hallmark cards, to be perfectly honest. But then that's because I'm observational, and I write stuff which I see and which really means things to me. And I also write stuff which I hope is not going to be too complex. So as an introduction, this is who I see myself as. I am the Cliché Laureate, whose use of words are not the best, whose phrases lack the luster, and couplets fail the test. My riddles are ridiculous, my meters mixed and matched. My sonnets are incredulous. My plots are seldom hatched. The words, though not spectacular, are in my own vernacular and express the thoughts of nations who never took the time or lacked the inspiration to put them down in rhyme. None of it's earth-shattering. Of grammar, there's a smattering. My verses, like my syllables, are stressed beyond belief, and use of pterodactyls shocks without relief. Pentameters, stranameters, alliteration lies, for absent intonation, versification dies. I'm going to share two other poems. The first one comes with a bit of a health warning, because it's not funny at all. It's very serious. I've written poems for all sorts of reasons. I've written poems for weddings. I've written eulogies. But this is the only time that I was asked to write a letter from a grieving wife to her dying husband. And they were staying with Jan and I at our house in France, and they'd come for their last weekend because one of his dying wishes was to have lunch at the Column d'Or. And so we did that, and strangely enough, in the morning I wrote him a very hysterically funny poem, strangely enough, about his cat and his Lowry. But that's for another time. When everyone had gone to bed, Sue said, John's, he died a couple of weeks later. She said, I want to express my thoughts to him in a poem, and I want you to write it for me. And I said, well, you tell me what you want to say, and I'll do my best to express those words. The main thing was that she said that her life would change, nothing would be the same. They hadn't been together long enough, they had only been together 9 years, they were both in their 70s, they had failed marriages, all that sort of stuff. I wrote her this letter, which she shared with John. How long would be enough for a love that will last forever? A lifetime to remember those few short years together. Love lasts and even grows outside the realm of living. And just as memories never fade, that love will go on giving. But don't tell me that life won't change, because our love will last. Where once we dreamt the future, I alone must dream the past. So take me with you in your arms and fly away, my dove. I wouldn't swap eternity for those short years of endless love. Sue went to bed, and she left me with a sense of my own mortality. It was a few days before my 50th, so it was 17 years ago. And across from our old house, one of the most beautiful graveyards in France, in Tourette-sur-Loup, just on the mountain above St. Paul de Vence. And it really is a beautiful graveyard. And thinking about my own mortality and John's, of course, and the house was built in the mountain, so literally it was a 3-story house, and there were massive rocks coming into the mountain. Beyond, you could see the sea. And as I said, I write observationally. I write what I see, and then it turns into something, a story. And I wrote the graveyard ahead and the sea all around. And I immediately thought, well, that's a hopeless start for a poem. So I lifted my eyes above the graveyard to the horizon as a metaphor of the end of years. And I wrote this by 4 or 5 in the morning, as it happens. The horizon ahead and the sea all around. Just the mountain beneath keeps my feet on the ground. The view is a snapshot from the album of life in the sea of time and the tide of strife. So where were we then, when we were in our prime, and the promise of joy was a gift of that time? And when we're young, It's an endless supply, with never a thought of a time we might die. The here and the now remain ours to live, with the hope of the future and what it might give. And live it we did, and count not the cost of the memories shared or the moments we lost. But time's so elusive and catches us up before we have tamed it or emptied the cup. One moment ahead and the world's in our grasp. A moment ahead and we fear it has passed. But it's not what has gone that can run up the bill. For the pleasures of life, mere age cannot kill. There's more in the glass. Time must be on our side. But as tight as we hold it, the sands through it slide. For the sands of time are not ours to keep, but are borrowed, and soon, through our fingers, will seep. And what's left is an echo that comes to us all. And the prize is our memories, the times we recall, happiness, sadness, joy, love and pain, that the next generation will surely regain. It is time that will win. You will learn at the kill. It's the only dimension that will not stand still.
DJ Laureate with us here. Well, that begs the question, doesn't it? With your prolific writing, with all those folders of poems around the house, etc., the fact that you are a publisher, that you've got a books division as well, when are you ever going to put poems into a book itself?
Ah, that's a funny old question, isn't it? This is the first time I've ever performed my poems in a public forum. I mean, family have heard them, and friends around the dinner table. I once recited that poem at Dubai College graduation day. Apart from that, none of my poems have had a public airing. And although I have been asked, why don't I put them into a book, I guess it's not ever been a real priority at any given time for me to do that. I know how long it takes to put a book together, and I'm pretty busy putting other people's books together.
But if we could get an invite from Isabel to come back next year, maybe, is that something you might do in the next 12 months, maybe?
I could put a volume of poetry and prose together. Prose is an interesting thing. I mean,
I've never heard you recite poetry in.
Well, it's Stephen Walsh's fault. He was at one of those dinners when I was asked to recite a poem, and I did, and then he sneaked to you, and then you wrote to me. So
I honestly think the poetry is outstanding, and I'm not saying that because I'm sat here, but on top of that, your delivery is so full of emotion because it's your poetry. So please, can I invite you to the 20th?
Well, I'll try not to come empty-handed next time. We'll try and get the team to put a volume of poems together.
Thank you.
Bless you. We're rapidly running out of time. We haven't talked about Muhammad Ali, we haven't talked about so many other individuals, etc. But I want to talk about His Highness. Is it fair to say that His Highness's books are the biggest selling for Motivate Books?
Yes. As an individual author, yes. I mean, this year we've published 2 volumes, like 2 box volumes like this of 8 books. I think this year alone we've published more than a dozen new books by His Highness. My Vision was the biggest selling book of all time, and it still continues to sell. This one is fascinating. Thought, someone shout it out to me. Flashes of Thought. And the reason being that Flashes of Thought, which we've also published in 12 different languages, and this is the first book that we ever produced in Braille. And that came about because His Highness was visiting, as he does, he was visiting some villages in the, in the hills, and this blind chap, who may have been the blind chap that we write about in this book, the wonderful poem, this blind chap called him over and he asked him why he couldn't read the book. And Sheikh Mohammed said to him, well, you can read it any time you want. I'll leave somebody here with a copy to read it. And he said to Sheikh Mohammed, do I look like a child to have a book read to me? He said, I can read the book if you give it to me in Braille. So His Excellency Mohammed Gawi, the Minister for Cabinet Affairs, called me pretty soon after that and said, how long will it take you to put this book into Braille? And I said, well, I don't know, I've never done a book in Braille before. And he said, well, you've got a fortnight. I was surprised he hadn't wanted it the day before. It's usually the case. Anyway, the team got onto it. We researched how you do these books in Braille. And then we produced this unbelievable edition. And we start off there with a photograph of His Highness's face in Braille. So you can feel that. And then the whole book is then in Braille. And I got the proof, and I sent it to Mr. Gagawi's office, and asked him if he liked it. And I called him up the next day. I said, "Did His Highness like the book?" He said, "Oh yeah," he said he loved it. He said he wants 2,000 copies. I said, "Oh great." I said, "I'll get on to that. Can you send me the proof back?" And he said, "No." He said, "You can't. You're not going to see that again." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I handed it to him." He said he ran downstairs, got in the thing, drove over to the village and gave it to the old man himself. And that's the mark of the man. Seriously, that is the mark of the man. And so that one, I think 12 languages plus Braille.
Talking of the mark of the man, I want to talk about the man in Fairservice. So many achievements. Great to see all the family here as well. Obviously, Dubai, the UAE, you're home from home now, and you've left a legacy here. But a man has achieved so much, and yet you're still learning as well. Is it true that you're doing a master's at the moment?
I am. I enrolled a couple of years ago at Hull University to do a master's degree in creative writing. It is enormously challenging. There's a great deal of work to do, and luckily I have 5 years to do it. I've got quite a lot of credits banked, and I hope that within the 5 years I will have completed it. But to be honest, I mean, especially somebody like me that is not that good, you know, with computers, and because of my sort of what I call my dyslexia. I mean, I haven't ever been able to tell left from right and all that sort of thing. So when you're editing people's work using track changes and bubbles and writing, because you have to edit at least 4 pieces of every assignment every week. You have to write one, and you have to edit at least 4 others from 4 of your cohort. And then you've got probably a flash fiction piece to write of 350 words. You've probably got 500 word of prose to write. There's no poetry. I decided, against my daughter's advice, to choose a degree which did not include poetry, because I thought doing a degree with poetry in it was a bit of a cheat, and I actually really wanted to sharpen my prose writing and editing skills. So yeah, it's a very big challenge. It's great. I've learned a great deal, and I think I've written some really good stuff.
I mean, referencing the video at the beginning and the last slide, to be continued, ... Is that what you see yourself doing, sitting on the terrace in France, penning bestsellers?
Yeah, I mean, the reason that this video was produced originally was an introduction for another event. I think it was the event at which I was receiving the award Advertising Person of the Year in 2019 would be good. In 2019, and there had to be a video before the presentation was made. And we decided, we called it an uncharted path because everything that you see here and everything that I've talked about today and the other businesses that we are in across the spectrum in communications and media, none of it was an uncharted path in the first place. In the first place, it was let's start a magazine, and then the business has developed organically over the last 43 of the 45 years that I've been here. And then when we wanted, at the end of it, a tag, was an uncharted, and then it was just to be continued. In other words, we didn't want it to be honest, we didn't want it to look as if I was picking up a Lifetime Achievement Award and retiring. This was something which we sincerely plan will be continued. But to your point, yes, I do see myself doing an awful lot more writing in the future.
Listen, the Shepherd's Hook is coming out. We are being hooked off. So we've got a 5-minute call. I'm going to wrap up with a couple of memories, just a couple of memories, a couple of final thoughts on what we've seen and what we've heard as well. What you most, when you go to bed at night, Ian, and you consider your thoughts, what are you most proud of during your career?
Oh, I think, first of all, the first thing you said was achievements, and then you said, what are you proud of? I mean, what I'm most, our greatest achievements, Janice and I, is having 4 grown-up children here and 4 wonderful grandchildren who've been born here, keeping together with wonderful friends and having this 45-year journey, which we've just passed the 45-year landmark of us being here. From a business point of view, I think I'm just somehow bewildered by it all, to be perfectly honest. It's a bit like when I was 33 and I walked into the drawing room at Curtis Brown, which is right on the corner of Piccadilly, very close to the Ritz Hotel, and walking in and literally during lunch pinching myself, and that's still something which I quite often have to resort to when I look at what we're all involved in together with my amazing team. I mean, I'm very proud of the fact that we have a team at Motivate, many of whom have been with the company for over 25 years, and when we have our get-togethers every year and we hand out all these long service awards, I never fail to make the point that they represent the real success of the company, because if we didn't have all of those amazingly talented people in the business, and so many of them staying for so long, we wouldn't have the business.
Listen, you've built a formidable legacy. It's exactly what this session has been called. You said to be continued. We need another couple of hours just to dive into all that you have achieved, all that you've done, all the people that you've met during this extraordinary career. One final one from me. Can you just put a rumour to bed one way or the other? Were you kidnapped by Muhammad Ali?
I was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was November 1982. I was invited to have breakfast and interview him. There was a couple of photographs there of me interviewing him at the Dubai International Hotel. And my eldest son had been born a couple of weeks earlier, and he did a lovely recording for Robert, wrote him a message and what have you. We spent an hour together, during which he recited a wonderful poem, which I have a recording of. He was a poet, we had so much in common. Anyway, we went well over our allocated slot for our interview. And I was seeing him off, he had the car there, And if anyone has ever seen that film, Almost Famous, when the journalist gets taken off with the rock band in the plane, basically the same thing happened. He said, what are you doing for the weekend? I said, well, I'm going to see my son. He's 2 weeks old, and my wife, and blah, 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 blah. He said, you know, you should come and stay at my hotel. They built me a hotel. I said, really, what's it called? He said, it's called Jebel Ali. And he whisked me off to Jebel Ali for the weekend, and it was just the most incredible experience.
It's another chapter there, that's for sure. Listen, Ian, we are out of time on this occasion. It has been an honour, a privilege to share the stage with you, and I'm sure everyone appreciates your time, your thoughts. We're looking forward to that volume of poetry for next year. Isabel, thank you very much indeed for that kind thought. A formidable legacy in one way and another. A formidable legacy that will continue as well. Ladies and gentlemen, Ian Fairservice.